Thank you very much for that, and well done everybody for getting here at 9 o'clock. Yeah, woohoo! So yes, I'm Paul Monks. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and just kind of a warning, we are not called DESNES. It sounds too much like DESRES. So our Secretary of State is quite clear. We are the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. So what I want to do this morning in my talk is to talk for about 20 minutes or so about what the role of innovation has to play in delivering net zero solutions, and then I'll give you some time to ask me some questions after that. We all know, and I don't think anybody who's at this meeting probably doesn't know, how critical innovation is to delivering net zero. And these are some statistics from the International Energy Agency, which say if you look at the technologies that we need, if you look at 2030, we've got about 80% of the technologies that we need. And actually, for this decade, the challenge is actually rolling out those technologies and scaling them up. But if we look towards 2050 and net zero by 2050, we have less than half of the technologies that we need, around 50% or so. So there is a real innovation challenge to meet net zero. It's probably not this decade, but actually we know we've got to develop and deploy, because actually the challenge of meeting net zero is often deploying at scale, you know, as part of this. So innovation is a major part of these, and we need half a set of new technologies to meet that challenge by 2050. So what are we doing in government to support that? As part of the net zero strategy that we produced in October 2021 for COP26, we produced a research and innovation framework. And what we did in that research and innovation framework is we made down the major challenges by sector as we saw it to deliver net zero. An important element of delivering net zero is that it's a systems challenge. And that's really important, because actually we need to take a systems approach to that innovation as well as a systems approach to delivering net zero. And actually on the right-hand side is a systems diagram that we took out of that, where you can see the usage sectors and the technologies. But I want to point out there are, I think, also 5 underpinning or enabling parts that are as important in the research and innovation space as the actual technologies themselves. I think often understated and often underrated is the role of digital in that. And I'm not talking about decarbonisation of digital, which is important, but the way that digital interoperability and data flows can help us understand the way that we need to decarbonise. Nobody will disagree with me that finance is an important part of that innovation piece. I'm putting that in a key enabler. Government policy and indicating the commitment to net zero, I think, is important for companies. I win my buzzword bingo by saying skills, and I'm probably the first person in the conference at 9:05 to mention the word skills, so that's one to me. But the skills are important as part of that. And actually, I don't know if many of you saw yesterday, the Climate Change Committee put out a new report on the skills for net zero that are required, and said that, you know, actually the new skills that we will need for net zero will outstrip the amount of skills that we'll lose from the kind of incumbent technologies that are as placed as that at the moment. So a really important part of the skills piece as well. But an important part also of that enabling is engaged citizens that want sustainable choice. And I think there's a demand, and there's a demand out there for innovation, and citizens want to know what the choices are for them, and there's great engagement for citizens as part of that. Just recently, at the end of March, we put out the Research and Innovation Delivery Plan. So it's great to have a strategy. You know, what is it that you are doing? The government is spending $4.2 billion over the period of 2022 to 2025 on research and innovation. And that's quite a lot of money. But actually, it's not just the public sector money that counts. It's also how that enables the private sector to grow from that sort of position. So it is very much that public-private partnership that lies at the heart of net zero. And actually we will do, and you can see the sort of sectors that we're investing in, you know, transport, CCUS, heat pumps, buildings, etc. And I looked at these figures recently against the global figures, and we're investing very similarly into the global innovation landscape, kind of in the same sort of proportions. And I think that also reflects some of the key decarbonisation challenges. If you look at power, the government pledges to decarbonise the power system by 2035, for example, and that puts a large trajectory, for example, in the terms of decarbonisation. So the two documents I would recommend you to have a look at where we lay out some of the innovation pathways that we can see to 2030 and then beyond 2030, and the role that government can play in doing that. And I'll come back to some examples of how we're supporting that in a few moments' time. I think it's also important, if we have an innovation system, to think a little bit about how we can support that across the different stages towards commercialisation. And the Net Zero Research and Innovation Framework Delivery Plan, we lay that out. And it goes from the fundamental science on the left-hand side of this diagram through the applied research and development programs to also then the handover to the wider public finance around that. And Innovate UK are here today, and they've got a major stage, and they're key elements of that demonstration and prototype around that, as well as programs that we have across government departments in aerospace, cars, transport and the like. So we do have a whole ecosystem of funding in order to deliver that vision for decarbonisation and to stimulate the private sector investment in the scale up and growth to achieve what clearly are going to be commercial opportunities in that. I mean, something like CCS, The Economist this week said it's going to be $1 trillion a year market by 2030. That's a market that, that we are actually just announced a large investment in CCUS in the UK. I think it's also worth recognising when we're talking about research innovation that actually international collaboration is part of that. We do a lot around international collaboration and support bringing in companies into the UK, particularly things through Mission Innovation, the clean hydrogen mission to make sure that we can push down the prices globally of hydrogen to $2 per kilo. That's quite challenging, if you think about the production and the transport and storage of that at that sort of price. But we're supporting that kind of international aspect also of driving the innovation piece, which is a key element of that. The biggest portfolio that we support for that sort of innovation is the Net Zero Innovation Programme. It builds on an earlier energy innovation sort of programme, and it really is looking to unlock jobs, but also leverage industrial funding across, I think it's 10 areas, if I count, on the right-hand side of this diagram, all the way from smart energy and storage through to disruptive technologies. And the next bit of the talk, I'll kind of review the sort of things that we're doing in that Net Zero Innovation portfolio in order to deliver that ecosystem of innovation that's required to decarbonise the economy. To date, we've got about 457 projects going, about 35% of the projects are at the high TRL. We've brought in about 345 million and created 3,000 jobs. The innovation portfolio is spread across the country. And I'm from the East Midlands, so I'm very pleased to see that the East Midlands somehow has 41% of that. So I don't know quite why that is, but there you go. It seems disproportionate, but there you go. But you see actually that it does spread out across the UK. So let's have a look at some of the challenges that are in the Net Zero Innovation portfolio, but also in our Net Zero Research and Innovation framework as part of this. I mean, actually, the second buzzword after skills, and I'm now at 9:10, is got to be hydrogen, hasn't it? I don't get to kind of 12 o'clock on a Monday, and I've talked about skills and hydrogen. I feel very disappointed. I mean, hydrogen, and where does that fit in? We want to grow a hydrogen economy. It's absolutely going to be part of delivering decarbonisation. In some senses, it's the champagne of the energy transition. It's going to be costly, but we're going to have to deploy it in the right sort of places. It's going to be very important to industrial decarb. In the 40s, it's going to be an incredibly important part of the probably aircraft industry. Airbus, for example, and Rolls-Royce both developing large hydrogen engines. So we've got to make sure we draw that. I mean, the problem with hydrogen, in some senses, is a bit like the net zero challenge. It's a systems problem from creation of the hydrogen to transport and storage, and use of that hydrogen requires a system level approach. And we're working very hard on that whole system level approach, from creating the supplies. We've announced during at the end of March support for the HyNet Northwest cluster, industrial decarbonisation cluster, very much focused on using hydrogen. There will be 1.2 terawatt hours of hydrogen storage in that cluster by the end of this decade. So that's a significant growth in the availability of that hydrogen. We're backing the new projects to develop hydrogen, including both the fuel cells to use them, as well as the next generation electrolyzer stacks that go with that, as well as the end use of that, including things for hydrogen for heat, looking at trials and the upcoming village trial for hydrogen heating around that. And I'm very happy to talk about hydrogen heating versus other uses of hydrogen if you wish to ask me the questions at the end of that. But also looking at the different ways that we can use and deploy hydrogen as part of that. Looking also in how to do the industrial decarbonisation, particularly the very difficult to drive sectors to stimulate growth in that. Keeping on the hydrogen sort of theme, we'll be opening very shortly in St Helens, which is the town I was born in and has the greatest rugby league team in the world, just in case you were worried about that fact here. The first float glass furnace, it says biofuels here, but actually we'll also, we've done biofuels in the past. We're actually going to be doing the first hydrogen furnace in St Helens shortly as part of the Glass Futures sort of project. Energy efficiency, I think often a much overlooked part of the energy transition, in the sense of we need to also think about demand reduction and the ways that we can use energy efficiency as part of the transition. So innovation, particularly that drives down energy usage, so you don't have to create all that low carbon energy power in the first place, is a really important part of the innovation landscape. And that energy efficiency in industrial processes, particularly so those large industrial processes there. Cement, a well-known, hard to decarbonise sector, using that kind of mixture of hydrogen and biomass, and we're doing that as part of the HyNet cluster, as well as thinking of red diesel replacement. We've just had a competition out there to say, how would you decarbonise, particularly these kind of off-road, difficult to reach sort of areas? What would you say are the right technology mix in order to get rid of those sort of red diesel dependent areas? So lots going on in the industrial innovation area to think about. Undoubtedly, one of the areas that is really ripe for development is that of CCUS. And I think it's not, the government's largely invested in the carbon storage part of that. And I think we'll be looking for competitions to come forward to utilise that sort of carbon. We've done some of the R&D on that, for instance, with Tata Chemicals, a programme to capture from a gas-fired power plant the CO2 and then recycle that for pharmaceutical-grade sodium bicarbonate as a demonstrator of the sort of thing that you can do. But we really want to push forward, accelerating those CCS technologies themselves, as well as the CCUS innovation that's required to utilise that. And the real challenge in the U element of that is how to make useful products at most energy efficiently. And I think when we look forward to the future, we're going to have a limited feedstocks for carbon, particularly renewable carbon. And that's why the U of CCUS, in my view, is going to be an important innovation goal and an important energy efficient innovation goal for the future, because we're going to need to be able to utilise that carbon as part of decarbonising our economy. So we really need to take that advanced CCUS sort of elements as part of that. Undoubtedly, we're going to need negative emission technologies. IPCC said in AR6 that we're going to need large-scale negative emission technologies, as we call them, or greenhouse gas removals as part of that, which are going to be a mixture of both nature-based solutions as well as direct air capture type solutions as part of that. We're going to need to innovate to do that. Direct air capture at the moment, how do you increase the efficiency of that? Increase the energy efficiency while get the carbon out. What's the right carbon pricing mechanisms that drive that? And there's a real need, and we're driving in our portfolio how to demonstrate those technology, but also then develop the business models that allow direct air capture to be an important part, or sorry, greenhouse gas removals to be an important part of that sort of piece, because then we've got to create the policies that in fact then drive that market approach to that. And we will need megatons and even up to 10 megatons by the mid-30s to meet carbon budgets of that sort of negative emission or greenhouse gas removal technologies, a combination probably of those two as part of that. So a key innovation area for the future, and this is one of the ones that we funded, and I think Mission Zero are here as part of that, that we funded as a kind of pilot plant type model as part of that. Undoubtedly, an important part of this is also to make sure that we've got the finance in place in order to do that. And we've had the Green Finance Accelerator, which has been really developing and piloting green finance products, solutions for homeowners and private landlords. Because really getting that finance into the decarbonisation, and particularly the small-scale decarbonisation, in a way, we've kind of got two innovation problems that are pulling against each other. We've got the large-scale decarb, which is easy to talk about, industrial decarb, direct air capture. But also, if we look at it, when we look at resource efficiency, energy efficiency, and we look at we look at the small scale, we've got to also have the innovation that drives that. And one of the big challenges, I think, to innovate is how to make the home retrofit retail. How do you, when actually we've got such a diversity of housing stock in the UK, is there an innovation solution out there, or a set of innovation solutions out there that make home retrofit easy to decarbonise? That's, I think, a real innovation challenge, as well as a policy challenge in terms of delivering funding in order to make sure that we've got the green finance to incentivise that sort of change. We're also thinking about very disruptive technologies. I've just gone from homes to outer space. So, this is kind of definitely 9 o'clock on a morning, isn't it? But we are looking at the disruptive technologies that have also that chance to really change the landscape with respect to decarbonisation. And we launched actually in July 2022 a project to have a look at space-based solar power. In a way, to kind of use government lingo, in my view, this is a no regrets policy. Why is it a no regrets policy? Because if you look at what you get from trying to achieve this in terms of wireless power communication, which you need to transmit the power back from space, high concentration solar PV, in space, the system study and how to put that together, and also the in-orbit assembly and in-orbit capability to put that together. They're all the things that are, in some senses, what we need in different areas of this. And great opportunities, particularly the in-orbit assembly, for example, in the space area, was going to be needed for next-generation large satellites. So actually, we are thinking also right at the edge of those disruptive technologies in a portfolio like this that can bring a different view to the way that we can decarbonise our economies. So space-based solar power, a really interesting thing. And I know there's a consortium, I talked to a consortium at Bristol quite recently of universities and businesses. And I know there's big people coming together to think about how to really achieve this sort of disruptive technology for space-based solar power. So hopefully, and there I am dead on my 20 minutes, hopefully what I've shown you is that innovation is really important to creating those economic opportunities and also those new technology solutions. We've got a significant support for NetZero Innovation. It's consistent for us with delivering energy security. We need to get to those deployable solutions. And I think that kind of solution space is where we're at, and we're pushing really hard about how do you turn those into solutions. It requires collaboration and risk by both the government and the private sector, and I've made that point a number of times. And there's really urgency to drive innovation this decade. This is a decade for innovation, and the next decade is a decade for deployment for the new technologies. And that's a really important message, and why I'm really happy to be here. And after I've talked to you, go see what's going on out there on the floor. Thank you very much indeed, and I'm happy to accept any questions. Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Professor Monks. We've got a first question. I'm going to hand you the mic, and then just put your hands up. There's mics on both sides.
Paul, my name is Mark Flottolini. Thanks for an excellent presentation. Question on my mind is, are you trying to do too much? Yeah, if I were a startup, everyone would tell me do one thing rather than 25. You have a limited budget. So is it right that the UK is trying to play a leading role in all those different spaces? Or would you actually get a lot more mileage by having a lot more focus on a limited number of technologies and applications?
So I think I would argue that one of the important roles that government-funded innovation can play compared to commercial innovation is that it can hold a wider portfolio of risk. So I think what it does better, and probably what governments should do, is hold that wider portfolio. But it's really working with that private sector investment and that translation piece that allows them, that portfolio, to be narrowed to where the UK can make economic opportunity from that. So that's probably what I would argue. I think that then comes to, in my early graph, that later stage funding. And if you look at that later stage funding, we have chosen in aerospace, auto, and some of the hydrogen technologies in particular, so, in that later stage, some sort of concentration. So I think early on, it's important that government has a high risk, large portfolio. It's best place to be able to do that, and that leads to a narrowing as we go to that public-private sector. Tensioning drives the narrowing of those sort of portfolios.
Hi, Will Gompertz from Innovate UK. I've just sort of noting that a lot of this portfolio is to do with net zero carbon, but I just wondered what sort of portfolios and activities are dedicated to other important emissions such as methane and their consequence on
Such as?
Methane.
Methane.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of methane mitigation?
Yeah.
Okay, so in some senses, decarbonising the heat system and getting away from methane gets rid of some of the methane super emission type issues, and making sure the gas chain, blue hydrogen and the agnosticism about that drives a little bit of the methane stuff. I mean, one of the most kind of gnarly challenges on methane is actually the land use sector. And the reduction of methane emissions from the land use sector, which by far is probably the largest emitter of methane in the UK. I think 80% is from agriculture. From memory, it's about 2 million tonnes per annum. So I think that's a key sort of sector, and that's quite difficult. I think you can go so far with husbandry. You can go so far. Bill Gates is funding vast amounts of innovation around feeding cows seaweed. In order to reduce their methane emissions. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, actually, you get into a part I didn't really talk about because I'm talking about innovation, which was when you get into green choices. And a lot of the green choices piece plays into that question of methane reduction. So I think, in a sense, it's making sure, my answer to your question is making sure that the methane supply chain isn't leaky. And that's the kind of total carbon budgeting piece, because we are going to be using, it's a very unpopular view, but we are going to be using, I think, abated fossil fuels as part of that mixture of the future, and therefore actually getting down the methane emissions is an important part of that in the supply chain around that. And actually the land use sector remains the big one where innovation is required, but also kind of fits to the green choice agenda as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Zoe Osmond, University of Brighton. How do you see the link between net zero and nature-based solutions given biodiversity collapse?
Yeah, so as I said with the GGR thing, the important area of greenhouse gas removals, that's where nature-based solutions really come in. I think, and we have a joint program between the government and the UKRI on that, where UKRI are doing the nature-based solutions and we're doing the techno solutions, if you will, and we're comparing. I think the challenge for the nature-based solutions from sitting on that and seeing the development is actually some of the carbon accounting that goes with that, and really making sure that you're doing carbon removal on, I want to say geological timescales, but I mean on that long-term timescales. So I think for me, that's the challenge in the nature-based solutions. And you get into the carbon debt issue there, don't you? Particularly around the issues of how long you're locking carbon up and what the relative time of taking it down, particularly if you're looking for sustainable circular solutions in that. So I think nature-based solutions have an important part to play. I think where the R&D is and the innovation there is making sure that you can get the carbon accounting right and really show that you're locking up carbon for at least, I won't say geological timescales, but long time scales as part of that. And that seems to me to be the challenge at the moment, in that. I mean, I've seen some really exciting innovations around using recycled building materials to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, for want of a better phrase. But I think that all needs to be really fully quantified and characterized. And I think for me, it's a long-term performance of some of those nature-based solutions as well that they're a key part of the innovative piece around that. Before I think we would put them into policy as something that we would fund for GGR.
Hi, Jacob Alkvist, Synchrostore. You mentioned the NZIP program, which has a very healthy budget, but that runs until 2025. Do you have any insight into what might be coming after that for that level of TRL?
Yeah, so we are now currently just beginning, we're in the middle of scoping what should follow on from something like the NetZero Innovation portfolio. I think we're convinced that there's still an important role that government has to play in that innovation space, partly because of the number of innovations that we need over that next period of time, that, as I said from my very first slide. So the answer is that we are now scoping that, and I think we'd be open to discussions with people about the sort of things that should be in that next portfolio. But we're doing a needs assessment at the moment around the innovation piece in its broadest sense to see where to concentrate that next tranche of investment, if we can secure it in the next government funding round.
Yeah. So Louisa Winch from Cranfield University. Just a quick question about where you see the role of renewable energy in this transition, in producing green hydrogen and as well from waste to hydrogen, in creating the circular economy rather than relying on the carbon capture technology.
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, green hydrogen is where you want to be. I mean, absolutely clearly where you want to be. I think the challenge for me is, and this is back to hydrogen being the champagne of the energy transition, is I think that what it says is, at the moment, kind of the logic model is we'll make green hydrogen by curtailing wind. So when we've got too much renewables, what we'll do is we'll curtail that. But that's about 25%. So why would you buy an asset and only use it 25% of the time? I think that's going to be a question. So I think that points to, should you be looking at solutions where you put in dedicated renewables for hydrogen? I think the answer to the question is yes. But I think the question then is a market question about how you stimulate that as part of it. So for me, I think actually the terrible things that have gone on in Russia-Ukraine show the wisdom of going to more the green hydrogen, because that gives you that energy independence vis-a-vis blue hydrogen, which gives you some element of dependence on LNG still, on methane in some form or the other. So I think there are some choices to be made there. I think it's, but the government policy at the moment is agnostic to both blue or green hydrogen. But I think you're right. For me, technologically speaking, around that, I would look to dedicated green hydrogen.
Hi, Anthony Belcher. Quick question. You mentioned the P word, policy, and I'd be interested in your thoughts around stability of policy and how important that is for innovators to be able to rely on. Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely. When we talk to innovators, this is the first thing they say. When people say to me, what is the government's commitment to net zero? I say, well, it's in law. I mean, we have the Climate Change Act. In 2019, that was increased to 100% by 2050 compared to 1990 levels. So in a sense, there is that sort of level of commitment. I mean, I'm a scientist who works in government, so it's difficult for me to comment. And you probably should go and ask that to Graham Stewart, who I think is on the far stage just about now, about the political appetite for that. But I sense from working in government no lack of appetite, particularly that. And I think the whole two sides of the coin at the moment between energy security and net zero being two sides of that same coin, I think has got a political resonance for the short term with the longer term as well.
Ali Naini, Turquoise. What do you think about LNG as a transitional fuel for trucks and regional aviation and things of that sort?
Yeah, I mean, this is always the vexed question of when does LNG stop being the transitional fuel, sort of question. And I think if you look at that, and you look at what the Department of Transport have published in terms of the decarbonisation of the sector, I think you can only go so far. If you look at what the heavy duty vehicle innovators are looking at, surprisingly, for me, there's a lot of battery powered HGVs coming to market, which I find quite surprising on one level. It kind of defies logic. And then the other kind of class is all the fuel cell hydrogen, either direct or fuel cell hydrogen sort of thing. So I don't see LNG being that long-term transition. Because at the end of the day, you're still producing carbon dioxide by burning it. And if you look at the innovation landscape and the large manufacturers, kind of LNG's day in that area, I think, is waning, in my view. If anybody wants to correct me, I feel free to be corrected. But I think you're looking at battery or hydrogen for the HGVs really and I'm only looking at what the major producers are making at the moment.
Paul, thank you so much for your time. That is us at 9:30. So I'd like you to put your hands together and give a round of applause
Thank you very
for
much.
Professor Paul Monks,
Cheers.
St Helens' biggest fan, with his plug. If there are any other questions, the department do have a stand, so if you want to take that opportunity, we'll be back on stage here at 9:45, where we'll be looking at supply versus demand for the acceleration to net zero, and we'll have the First Movers Coalition. So you're very welcome to join us. But thank you again, Paul.